It was an ordinary evening, one of those that had once become routine, a time when we'd typically unwind, have a drink and argue over trivial things like which takeout to order or what movie to watch. But now those evenings felt like distant memories, as if they belonged to a past life, slowly fading away. I couldn't even pinpoint the exact moment when things began to shift between us, but the growing distance had become impossible to ignore. That night I sat in the living room, flipping through channels with little interest, glancing at the clock every few minutes, waiting for Patricia. She was late again, without any message or explanation. I kept reminding myself that we were adults and there was no need to worry just because my wife was running behind schedule. But recently her lateness had become routine. There was always a reason: work meetings, impromptu hangouts with friends, or errands that dragged on endlessly. Initially it seemed harmless, but when it happens repeatedly, you can't help but notice the change. You feel it, that subtle shift that's hard to ignore. The familiar sound of the key turning in the lock reached my ears. She entered quietly, as if not wanting to disturb me, even though I was right there on the couch. Her hair was styled more than usual, and despite her slightly smudged makeup, she still looked put together, different from how she had looked when she left in the morning. She glanced at me briefly, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. It was almost imperceptible, like she hadn't expected to see me waiting, but in an instant she returned to the Patricia I had come to know, lately distant, polite, almost rehearsed. "Hi," she greeted me, tossing her bag near the door, just like she had done so many times before. But now, every little detail stood out to me. Each small action felt amplified, as if my mind had become hyper-aware of every nuance. "Rough day?" I asked. "Yeah," she responded quickly, heading straight to the kitchen without meeting my eyes. There was a late meeting. Then I grabbed dinner with Margaret. I watched as she busied herself in the kitchen, avoiding eye contact, fiddling with things on the counter, as if trying to fill the silence. Normally I would have let it go, made some offhand comment, and let the conversation fade like usual, but not tonight. Tonight I knew something she didn't realize. Margaret wasn't even in the country. She'd been posting photos from a resort all week. I had helped her pack for the trip and wished her a good vacation. Yet here was Patricia sitting before me, lying. But I didn't react immediately. I kept my composure, my heart racing inside, outwardly calm. This wasn't the time to confront her. If I did, she'd only find a way to twist the situation, come up with an excuse, or worse, make me doubt myself. Leaning back on the couch, I replied casually, "Sounds nice." "You've been so busy lately, it's good that you're finding time to relax." She flashed me a tight smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. That hurt more than I expected, because I recognized that look. It was the same one I had seen before on people who had mentally checked out, who had already made a decision but hadn't yet voiced it. Then she dropped the bombshell so casually I almost missed it. "Oh, by the way, this weekend I'm staying at a hotel with her," she said, not realizing the weight of her words. "Just a little girls' night getaway." Girls' night with Margaret, who was across the globe. I kept my expression neutral, masking the storm of thoughts swirling in my mind. I felt like a chess player, calculating every possible outcome several steps ahead. She was lying again, but this lie held more significance. She was up to something, and I wasn't going to stand by silently anymore. "That sounds great," I replied, playing the role of the unsuspecting, supportive husband. But internally, everything had changed. My decision was made. This weekend wasn't going to unfold the way she expected. She had no idea I knew about her so-called trip with Margaret. She was entirely unaware that her plan was already falling apart. The moment she mentioned the trip, something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to pretend to be the clueless spouse anymore. Not this time. If she thought she could weave lies, disappear for the weekend, and come back as if nothing had happened, she was in for a rude awakening. That night I couldn't sleep. Scenarios kept running through my mind. Who was she really planning to meet? Was it just a random fling, or someone she had been seeing secretly for a while? The more I thought about it, the more obvious it became this wasn't a spontaneous decision. She had planned everything carefully, layering her lies, assuming I'd remain in the dark. But I wasn't. By morning, I had already begun gathering information. The first step? Calling Robert. Robert's the tech expert, the one who knows how to handle these things. We've been friends since college. I didn't tell him everything, just hinted that I suspected Patricia was hiding something and needed his help. He didn't ask questions, just promised to have something for me by noon. By lunchtime, I had what I needed: access to her messages and real-time tracking of her location. I'm not proud of it, but I wasn't going to confront her without solid proof. And now that proof was right in front of me. She wasn't planning to meet Margaret. Her messages with someone named Charlie told the whole story. How I had missed the signs before I couldn't explain. But now, reading their conversations, everything became clear. They had been talking for months. Some messages seemed innocent, but others made my blood boil. Flirting, plans to meet, and of course their arrangements for the weekend. They weren't just meeting for drinks, they had booked a hotel room. Their messages were filled with excitement, counting down the days until they could be together. My hands trembled as I read, my heart pounding. The flirting hurt, but what cut the deepest was how she talked about me. To her I was just an obstacle, something to endure while she enjoyed herself. She mocked how oblivious I supposedly was, bragging about how easily she could sneak away without me noticing. They laughed at me behind my back. If she thought I was blind, she was about to learn otherwise. Her weekend escape was not going to go as planned. She planned to leave Saturday afternoon, probably with a flimsy excuse about meeting Margaret, thinking I'd spend the weekend with friends or zoned out in front of the TV, none the wiser. But I had my own agenda. On Friday night, I made my move. I reserved a room at the same hotel where they'd be staying, on the same floor. Whether it was chance or destiny, they picked a downtown hotel, and securing a nearby room wasn't difficult. There was a strange satisfaction in being so close, ready to watch her lies unravel in real time. By Saturday morning, I was more than prepared. Patricia was packing her things, barely able to hide the excitement bubbling up inside her. She hummed lightly while tossing clothes into her suitcase, like she was getting ready for another carefree weekend with friends. "You're sure you don't mind me leaving?" she asked, pausing with that same innocent smile she always used when she was testing me. She wanted to see if I'd catch on, but I stuck to my script, playing the role I had carefully planned. "Of course not, you deserve a break," I replied, forcing out a smile that felt like it burned my face. "Enjoy yourself." Her smile widened, this time genuine, unaware of what was really coming. The moment she walked out the door with her suitcase, my phone buzzed. Robert had sent her location, and I watched the small blue dot slowly move across the map toward the hotel. My pulse quickened with every inch. By the time she arrived, I was already parked a block away, watching from a distance. She stepped out of the car, phone in hand, and within minutes, a tall man appeared beside her. It had to be Charlie. They didn't even bother with small talk, immediately holding hands like teenagers sneaking off on a date. I watched them walk through the revolving doors and head toward their room. Rage surged within me, but I held it back. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. No, I needed to see it all unfold firsthand. I wanted her to realize that her game was over, that her lies had finally caught up with her. I followed them inside, my mind already rehearsing how everything would play out. She thought she was in control, completely unaware that her time was running out. I found a seat in the hotel lobby and settled in to wait. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly, every second feeling like an eternity. My heart raced, but outwardly I remained calm. To anyone around, I looked like just another guest staring at his phone, but inside I was seething with fury. Every instinct urged me to storm upstairs, catch them in the act, and expose their secrets. But I had to stay focused. I couldn't afford to act on impulse. Not yet. The moment had to be perfect. Thanks to Robert, I had real-time access to her location, so I knew exactly where they were. Their room was on the 7th floor, room 755. I double-checked the details, my finger hovering over the screen as tension built. What if she spotted me in the lobby? What if they left the hotel before I could act? Thoughts swirled in my mind, but it was too late to turn back. I was ready for this. About an hour after she checked in, I noticed their dots on the map starting to move. They were heading to the hotel restaurant. This was my chance. I grabbed the keycard to my room, which was just 2 doors down from theirs, and quietly made my way to room 758. I had chosen it specifically for its proximity, close enough to keep tabs on them, but far enough not to draw attention. The thought of her returning to her room, completely oblivious that I was just a few steps away, fueled my determination. I waited about 10 minutes after they settled into the restaurant before making my move. The layout of the hotel made it easy to avoid running into them. My heart pounded in my ears as I passed my room and approached theirs. From my jacket pocket, I pulled out a small envelope. Inside were copies of all their messages, mockery, whispers, hidden remarks, everything had been building up over time. I carefully slid the envelope under their door, a faint smirk forming on my face. This was just the beginning. It wasn't going to end with an awkward conversation. I needed more than to just make her uncomfortable. I needed to see her betrayal with my own eyes. So I booked a table at the same restaurant where they planned to have dinner. I made sure to sit far enough away to remain unnoticed but close enough to catch every detail. The entire situation felt surreal. There I was, calmly sipping my drink, watching my wife laugh, flirt and joke with another man as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I saw them open a bottle of wine, her fingers brushing against his hand as she giggled. She leaned in toward him, whispering something as though it was meant just for the two of them. And there it was again, that same restrained smile she had given me the night before. But this time it wasn't forced. This time it was genuine. Her face lit up with an excitement I hadn't seen in months, at least not with me. They were so wrapped up in each other, lost in their own world. To any outsider, they would have looked like just another couple enjoying a night out. But to me, it was as obvious and painful as a slap to the face. When dinner ended, I watched them stand up and leave together, hand in hand, as if heading off for a romantic escape. My grip tightened around my glass, but I managed to hold back. Just barely. I followed them from a safe distance, far enough to stay hidden, but close enough to hear their laughter echoing down the hallway. They stopped at their room, whispering softly to each other. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was going to happen next. The door clicked, and they disappeared inside. Now it was my turn. I paced the hallway, trying to calm my breathing and control the fury building up inside me. By now they must have found the envelope I left under their door. They had seen the messages, and now the truth was staring them in the face. I imagined Patricia's reaction when she realized what I had done, the fear, the guilt, the moment it would hit her that her secret was out. But I wasn't finished yet. In the quiet of the hallway, I returned to their room. My hands were steady now, cold and firm. All that remained was a relentless determination. I could hear their voices through the door, hers and Charlie's. They were speaking softly, even chuckling. Still clueless about what was about to happen. They had no idea what was coming. I raised my hand and knocked 3 firm taps. Silence. I knocked again, louder this time. Inside, I heard hurried steps and muffled sounds. My heart was racing, but my mind remained sharp and focused. This was the moment. No more hiding, no more pretending. Patricia was about to face the truth, and I was going to witness it all. The door creaked open just a little, and there she was. At first, she didn't even realize it was me. She cracked the door slightly, cautiously peering through, her face calm and content, as if everything was going according to plan. But when her eyes met mine, I watched her expression change in an instant. Her face went pale, the smile disappeared. "Oliver, what? What are you doing here?" she stammered, her voice shaky. Her unexpected trembling caught me off guard. I said nothing, holding back, letting the tension settle between us. She quickly glanced around the room, probably hoping to see if Charlie was still hidden, as if what was already exposed could somehow remain concealed. The fear in her eyes grew, unfolding like a slow-motion disaster, unstoppable and inevitable. This time she couldn't control the situation or twist the story in her favor. She stepped into the hallway, leaving the door slightly ajar, as if that small gesture could undo everything I had just uncovered. "Oliver, let me explain," she started softly, her voice barely above a whisper, as though hoping to keep the moment discreet. She probably wanted Charlie to stay hidden. She reached out and touched my forearm gently, as if that could somehow lessen the blow, as if she could escape this mess like she had done so many times before. "Go ahead," I said coldly, my voice distant. I'm listening. Her eyes blinked rapidly, and her lips moved, but no clear words came out. She was like a fish gasping for air, unable to form a coherent excuse. She had nothing. No story prepared this time, no way out of the lie. "It's not what you think," she muttered, her voice trembling as she tightened the belt on her robe, though it didn't matter. Everything had already been exposed. We were just talking. "It's complicated. Please, let me explain." "Complicated," I interrupted, feeling the anger rise, though I kept my voice steady. "Complicated is losing your wallet or arguing over something small. This," I pointed to the slightly open door. "This is simple, Patricia. You lied. You planned all of this with him. What's complicated about that?" her face contorted in fear, not of me, but of the inevitable collapse of the illusion she had worked so hard to maintain. "Oliver, please." "It's not what you think. I was going to tell you, She faltered, searching for words that no longer existed. From the room came a faint noise. Charlie, the man at the center of this mess, wasn't going to stay hidden much longer. He was probably standing by the bed, listening, knowing there was no way out. I wasn't going to let him slip away unnoticed. "Why don't you bring him out here," I said, louder now, so Charlie would realize there was no point in hiding anymore. "There's no sense playing games. Charlie, I know everything." Patricia's eyes widened in horror. "Oliver, don't," she started, but it was too late. I pushed her aside and flung the door open, and there he was. Charlie, in his early 40s, tall with dark hair, stood awkwardly in jeans and a t-shirt, as if this were some carefree college fling and not the destruction of a nearly 20-year marriage. His face was pale, his mouth slightly open, as if to say something, but the words never came. He stood there frozen, like a deer caught in headlights. The room was exactly as I had imagined the luxurious space, the large bed, their luggage carelessly tossed in the corner, all undeniable evidence of the truth they had tried so hard to hide. An open bottle of wine sat on the nightstand, adding more clarity to the situation. "Enjoying your little getaway?" I asked, sarcasm dripping from every word as I stepped into the room, letting the door quietly click shut behind me. The air was thick, almost suffocating. Charlie stood motionless, his eyes darting between me and Patricia, silently pleading with her to fix this mess. But she was just as lost, her face full of confusion. I don't know what she told you," Charlie mumbled, his voice shaky, his hands raised as if surrendering a classic gesture of a man caught in the act. "But this isn't—" I cut him off sharply, my stare silencing him before he could finish. I wasn't here for excuses, and I wasn't going to let him act as if he didn't understand the gravity of the situation. "You knew she was married," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "You knew exactly what you were doing." Charlie swallowed hard, instinctively stepping back toward the bed. His words dried up. He realized he was no longer a part of this confrontation. Now, it was just between Patricia and me. As I turned to her, I no longer saw the woman I had spent my life with. That person was gone, replaced by someone embodying lies and betrayal. She didn't cry or beg for forgiveness. She stood there, holding on to the last shred of hope that she could somehow salvage this nightmare. "Did you plan all of this?" My voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but each word was sharp as a blade. "You booked the room, lied to my face, laughed behind my back. For this, Patricia?" For him, she parted her lips to respond, but no sound came out. I saw her throat tighten, watched as her eyes finally filled with tears, but I felt nothing. No pity, no remorse, nothing. "Listen carefully," I said, stepping closer. "You made your choice. You chose him. You chose this over us, and there's no going back." Her lips trembled, and finally in a half-whisper, she said, "Oliver, I'm sorry, please." But I cut her off before she could finish. I'm done. The coldness in my voice was more powerful than I expected. The words hit her like a punch, and I saw the impact as her eyes blinked and the tears fell. But it didn't matter. I couldn't care. The betrayal ran too deep, consuming everything. I turned toward the door, each step feeling heavy, loaded with the finality of it all. Before leaving, I glanced at Charlie one last time. He hadn't moved, still frozen in fear. "Good luck," I said with biting sarcasm. "You're going to need it," and with that I left. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I exhaled. It was over. As I stepped into the hallway, time seemed to slow. After what felt like hours, maybe even days, my mind began to clear. The adrenaline that had surged through me slowly faded, leaving behind an empty, cold void. It wasn't relief. It wasn't satisfaction. The emptiness gnawed at me from within. I knew what needed to be done, but now that it was over, there was no sense of release, just a dull, aching void. I stood in the elevator, watching the doors close as the silence wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. Part of me almost expected her to run after me, to call out, but deep down, I knew that was just a fleeting illusion. Patricia was likely still upstairs, drowning in tears, trying to process the gravity of what had happened. But her tears couldn't restore what was lost, not after what I had discovered, not after the betrayal. The lobby was busy, but it felt distant. People were checking in, couples chuckled softly, Families wrestled with their luggage. It all seemed like a blur as I moved through the crowd like a ghost, detached from everything around me. My mind was elsewhere, weighed down by the enormity of what had just taken place. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped into the night. The city lights flickered overhead, indifferent to the chaos raging inside me. It all felt unreal. My world had flipped upside down, yet the city continued as though nothing had changed. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't check it. I already knew it was her. Maybe she had sent some empty apology or a feeble attempt to justify herself. It didn't matter. I kept walking, aimlessly, unable to stop, needing to escape the crushing weight of everything that had crumbled. The usual sounds of the city: honking cars, distant chatter, the shuffle of footsteps blurred into one, muffled as though I were walking through someone else's life. Eventually, I found myself in a small park, dark and quiet, with benches beneath the trees. Here, at least, the noise of the city felt far away, and the chaos of the hotel seemed even more distant. I sat on a bench, staring at the empty path ahead. My thoughts finally caught up to me. 39 years. 39 long years, and this was where it had all ended. How had everything fallen apart so completely? I pulled my phone from my pocket, staring at the screen before unlocking it. Her name appeared: missed calls, unread messages. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen before I gave in and read them. Oliver, can we talk? I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. Please don't end things like this. We can fix this. I almost laughed at the absurdity. She didn't want this to happen. What was that supposed to mean? Was there some acceptable level of betrayal? The thought disgusted me. I shoved the phone back into my pocket, repulsed. Nothing could be fixed. There was no version of reality where her actions could be justified or forgiven. But as I sat there, trying to shake off the emotions, memories surfaced: the good times, the moments when we were truly happy, when it seemed like nothing could come between us. Late nights spent talking about everything under the sun, the way she used to look at me as if I was her whole world. Where had that gone? When had I stopped being her partner and become just another obstacle in her life? The numbness that had initially gripped me was slowly being replaced by something darker: anger. But this wasn't the kind of anger that had flared up in the hotel room. This was deeper, more insidious, a slow burning rage that seeped into my very core. How long had this been happening? How long had she been lying, pretending everything was fine while hiding her betrayal? The more I thought about it, the worse I felt. My phone buzzed again, snapping me from my thoughts. Another notification. This time I couldn't resist looking. Oliver, I'm so sorry. Please listen to me. I can't lose you. It was just one mistake. We need to talk. I swear it's not what you think. Please come back. Let me explain everything. One mistake? As if that could somehow lessen the pain. For a moment, her words touched me, her desperate attempt to explain herself. But what was there to explain? That it was just a meaningless fling? That she didn't really care about Charlie? That it hadn't shattered everything between us? She was scrambling to salvage whatever was left, now that she realized she was on the verge of losing everything? But it wasn't about one mistake. It wasn't about Charlie. It was about how she had planned it all, looked me in the eye, lied to my face, and laughed behind my back. The real betrayal wasn't in the act itself, but in the deceit, in how she had treated me like a fool while secretly meeting him. That's something I could never forgive. I sat there, staring blankly into the night, lost in thought for what felt like an eternity. Part of me wanted to respond, to listen to her just to close the chapter, but the rational part of me knew it wouldn't change anything. No explanation could fix this. No apology could make things right. Finally, I stood up, burdened by the decision, but with clarity. I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to listen to more of her lies. There was nothing left for me in that hotel room or in our relationship. As I left the park, I pulled out my phone one last time to send the message that would close this chapter for good. We're done, Patricia. There's no going back. Don't contact me again. I hit send and turned off my phone. The cold night air stung my face as I walked away, but it didn't matter. I had made my decision. It was over, for real this time. The next morning felt surreal, as if I had woken up in a completely different world. I hadn't gone home. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself in a rundown motel on the outskirts of the city. I lay on the bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. My phone sat on the nightstand, turned off, face down like a ticking time bomb I refused to engage. I knew what I'd find if I turned it on: more messages from Patricia, more pleas for forgiveness. But I wasn't ready to face that yet. Not now. The room felt stifling, the air heavy with everything that had happened the night before. I needed to get out, to clear my head before my thoughts consumed me entirely. So I got dressed, grabbed my keys, and left with no destination in mind, just driving, letting the sound of the engine drown out the chaos in my head. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had happened. People went about their daily lives, kids waiting for buses, shops opening, couples walking hand in hand, as if it were just another day. It felt like a dream, as though the ground had disappeared from beneath me, while the world around me kept moving forward, oblivious to the turmoil I was going through. I drove aimlessly, for what felt like hours, until I ended up on the outskirts of the city, near the riverbank. I parked the car, got out, and sat on a bench overlooking the water. The river flowed steadily, its calm rhythm completely at odds with the storm raging inside me. I stared at the water, hoping that its tranquility would somehow settle the storm within me, that it might anchor me amidst the inner turmoil. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't push away the thoughts that had haunted me since I left the hotel room. How long had this been happening? How many times had she lied to me, looking directly into my eyes, acting as if nothing was wrong while deceiving me with him? Or was Charlie just the latest in a string of affairs? Could this have been going on far longer than I ever imagined? My mind spun with endless questions, each one only intensifying the growing sense of horror. The uncertainty was suffocating, feeding my paranoia. My thoughts drifted back to our wedding day, a simple ceremony with just close friends and family, but it had been perfect in its simplicity. I remembered looking at Patricia, radiant in her gown, convinced that she was mine forever, that what we had was unbreakable. I believed in us. She smiled warmly as she recited her vows, the very promises she would later break. The same eyes that once promised love and faithfulness had lied to me. Now, I couldn't even recognize her. As the hours dragged on, I tried to make sense of it all. What was I supposed to do now? Divorce seemed inevitable. There was no going back, regardless of how many apologies she offered, how many tears she cried. Deep down, I knew I could never trust her again. She had broken something fundamental between us, something that couldn't be repaired. But the thought of dismantling the life we had built together, undoing years of memories and experiences, hurt more than I had anticipated. I didn't have the strength to think about lawyers or the steps to end it all. I only knew one thing: I couldn't return to what once was, not after this. After what felt like hours, I finally pulled my phone from my pocket and turned it on. The screen lit up, flooded with notifications, missed calls, texts, voicemails, all from her. Each one felt like a punch to the gut. I scrolled through, barely absorbing the words: "Oliver, please let me explain. I'm so sorry, you have to believe me. We can fix this. Don't destroy everything over one mistake." One mistake, that's what she kept calling it, as if it was something minor, something that could be undone with enough apologies. But it wasn't just a mistake. It was a deliberate choice, a series of choices that drove a wedge into our marriage. She chose him. She chose the lies. Now she was frantically trying to repair what couldn't be mended. One message stood out from the rest, sent just a few hours ago: "Oliver, please, I'm home. I can't stop crying. I don't know what to do without you. Please come back. We need to talk. I'm begging you." I stared at her words, my finger hovering over the screen, paralyzed by indecision. She seemed broken, even shattered, and despite everything, a small part of me, the part that had loved her deeply for so many years, hesitated. The part of me that had cherished those moments of laughter, the times I thought we were invincible, almost wanted to turn back. Almost. But deep down I knew there was no return. There was no us anymore, not after everything that had happened. I let the phone slip from my hand onto the seat beside me and sat still, staring blankly at the dashboard. Gradually, the weight of reality settled on me. I wasn't going back to that house. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a conversation or listen to her excuses and apologies. They would be nothing more than empty echoes. There was nothing left to discuss. Eventually, I started the car and drove back toward the city. I had no idea where I was going, but sitting there in the silence had become unbearable. As the car hummed along, my thoughts drifted to practical matters: moving out, finding a lawyer, beginning the process, all those logistical things I'd soon have to deal with. But as I considered them, it felt as though I were watching someone else's life unfold. as if I were a spectator in my own reality. Yet this was real. When I pulled into the driveway, the daylight had already started to fade and shadows stretched across the yard. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to face her, but I needed to gather my things. This had to be final. The front door creaked as I pushed it open, and almost immediately I heard her soft, muffled sobs from the living room. She hadn't noticed me enter, and I paused for a moment, watching her from the doorway. She was curled up on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest, looking small and fragile in a way I'd never seen before. She no longer resembled the Patricia I once knew. Now, she was a stranger, a shadow of the woman I once thought I loved. When she realized I was there, her head jerked up, her eyes swollen and red from crying. "Oliver," she whispered, her voice barely audible. There was something in her gaze, as if I were the only thing holding her together, the last thread keeping her from falling apart. But I didn't move. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, looking at her, feeling nothing. "Please," she whispered again, rising unsteadily to her feet, her hands trembling as she reached toward me. "Please don't leave. I can't." Her voice broke. "I don't know what to do without you. I made a mistake, but I love you, Oliver. I love you so much. We can fix this. We can get through this. Please." I slowly shook my head deliberately. "There's nothing left to fix, Patricia." My words hit her like a physical blow. She collapsed back onto the couch, burying her face in her hands, her sobs growing louder. I should have felt something seeing her like that. It should have torn me apart, but it didn't. All I felt was a cold, unshakable certainty that this was truly the end. We were done. Without another word, I turned and walked upstairs to pack my things. The house felt suffocating, like a mausoleum filled with echoes of a life that no longer existed. As I walked down the hall to our bedroom, everything looked the same. The bed we had shared for years was still neatly made, untouched since the morning before. Her belongings were scattered on her side of the room, fragments of a life still clinging to the past. Scarves carelessly draped over a chair, books piled unevenly on the bedside table, and the faint trace of her perfume still lingered in the air. The realization that her presence was still so strong in this space made me feel sick. I opened the closet and pulled out a gym bag, beginning to pack clothes, toiletries, just the essentials. My hands moved mechanically, as though I were watching someone else's life fall apart. Each item I packed felt like another reminder of the collapse of our marriage. The silence in the house was overwhelming, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards and Patricia's distant sobs downstairs. I tried to block out the sound of her sobbing, but it was impossible to ignore. As I zipped up the bag, I paused, my eyes drifting toward the mirror across the room. Forcing myself to take a hard look, I saw a reflection that felt foreign, tired, empty, seething with anger. The face staring back at me was that of a man whose entire world had been shattered, yet I couldn't fully grasp the magnitude of it all. My gaze shifted to the dresser where a photo of us stood. It had been taken just a few years ago, during a time when we were happy. We were laughing, arms around each other, our eyes filled with a love we thought was unbreakable. That memory was still fresh in my mind. The picture was from our anniversary, a trip to the mountains where we spent a week hiking, talking, and reconnecting. Back then, I believed nothing could tear us apart. I couldn't have been more wrong. A tightness gripped my chest, and I quickly turned away from the photo, pulling open a drawer to grab the last of my things. There was no point in holding on to what was already gone. That version of us didn't exist anymore. Slinging the gym bag over my shoulder, I took one final glance around the room. This space had witnessed countless memories, some joyful, some painful, but now it felt unfamiliar, like I no longer belonged here. As I descended the stairs, I must have woken Patricia. I heard her stir in the living room, and when I reached the bottom step, she appeared in the doorway. Her face was swollen from crying, her hair messy, and she looked at me with desperation, as if I were her last hope. But I couldn't be that person for her anymore. "Oliver," she called, her voice shaking and fragile. "Please don't go. Stay. Let's talk. We can fix this. I'll do anything." I promise. Her words hung in the air, suffocating. I looked at her, the woman I had once built a life with, the woman I had loved deeply and felt nothing. Everything that had once connected us was gone, leaving only a hollow emptiness. "I've said all I needed to say," I replied, my voice steady but cold. There's nothing left for us to talk about. You made your choice, Patricia, and now I'm making mine." She hesitated, stepping forward, reaching out as if she could pull me back into the life we once shared, but I didn't move. "Oliver, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Don't go. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just give us one more chance." One more chance. How many chances had I already given her? How many times had I ignored the warning signs, overlooked the growing distance between us, convinced myself that things could get better? I had given her more chances than I could count. But this was unforgivable. This was the ultimate betrayal. I shook my head and took a step back. "Too late," I said quietly. Patricia felt it, her whole body reacting as the reality hit her hard. Her face twisted in pain as she collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down her face, as though my words had physically hurt her. "Please," she managed to choke out through her sobs, her voice barely holding together. "I love you. I love you," she repeated, clinging to my jeans like they were her last lifeline. I looked down at her, and for a brief moment something flickered inside me, maybe pity, maybe sadness. But whatever it wasn't enough to change anything. Nothing could fix the damage she had caused. Slowly, I pulled my leg out of her desperate grip and turned toward the door. My hand hovered over the doorknob as I glanced back at her one last time. She lay curled up on the floor, her sobs filling the silence of the room. I stood there, waiting, half expecting to feel something: regret, guilt, anything that might stop me, but there was nothing. "I once loved you too," I said quietly, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "But you destroyed that with those words." I opened the door and stepped out. The cold night air hit me like a slap, instantly clearing my thoughts. The door clicked shut behind me, cutting off the life I once knew. For a moment I stood still, staring at the quiet street. Everything around me continued as usual, unchanged, unaware of what had just ended. But for me, everything had changed. I left that house as a different person than the one who had entered. I walked away from the woman I once believed would be by my side forever. I walked away from the dreams, plans, and future we had built together. As I approached the car, I felt the weight on my shoulders slowly begin to lift painfully, gradually, but it was lifting nonetheless. Each step I took away from that house was a step into the unknown, towards something new. I tossed my bag onto the back seat and sat behind the wheel. For a moment I just sat there, surrounded by the silence of the night, the engine off, the stillness enveloping me. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly. I took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. Without looking back at the house, I turned the key, pulled out of the driveway and drove away. There was no turning back. The future was uncertain, and I had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was clear: I was free. The days that followed were chaotic, like ripping off a bandage, quick and painful but necessary. The real pain, however, came later, after the dust had settled. There was no more pretending. My marriage was over, and I had to face the reality of life without Patricia. I spent a few nights at Robert's place. He didn't pry, and I was grateful for that. He just handed me a beer, let me crash on his couch, and kept the TV loud enough to drown out the silence. But no matter how much noise filled the space, the quiet moments always found a way in. Lying on his old couch, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spiraled endlessly. It always came back to Patricia. How had it all gone so wrong? What could I have done to prevent it? Why hadn't I seen the signs sooner? In the end, I couldn't avoid the practical matters any longer. I had to deal with the house, the bills, and the life we had built, which now had to be dismantled piece by piece. I knew I couldn't hide out at Robert's forever. On the 5th day, I finally found the courage to call a lawyer. That's when it all became painfully real. Sitting in the lawyer's office, hearing terms like asset division, alimony, and property settlement, it felt like a punch to the gut. Everything we had built together was now being split up, sold off like items at a garage sale. The house, our savings, even the dog. Everything was up for negotiation, divided until there was nothing left of the life we had once shared. My mind drifted back to that night at the hotel, to the look in Patricia's eyes when I confronted her. I remembered how she broke down as I walked out the door. There was no going back. The only path was forward, even if it meant walking through the wreckage of what once was. Patricia's words lingered in my mind, like a conversation we never truly had. After reading her note, I didn't feel the relief I had hoped for. It didn't ease the anger or sorrow. If anything, it deepened the sense of loss or grief for something intangible, for the life that could have been. At one time, I had imagined a future where our love would survive any challenge, where we would grow old together, sharing laughter and memories. That future had felt so real, so certain. But now it seemed like a distant fantasy, a dream far removed from reality. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I felt the overwhelming silence of the house closing in around me, making it difficult to breathe. The home we had once shared now felt like an empty shell, a collection of memories stripped of the warmth it once held. Her note was full of regret, but that didn't make it enough. She acknowledged her mistakes, but that didn't erase them. It served as a reminder of what we used to have, but also of what we had lost. No apology, no matter how heartfelt, could turn back time. I knew I had to let go not just of Patricia, but of the life I had constructed in my mind, the ideal future I had held on to, the one that had never truly been ours. Moving forward wasn't about finding closure in her words or even through the divorce. It was about finding peace within myself, understanding that not all wounds heal completely. Some leave scars that remain as reminders of the pain long after it fades. Standing up from the bed, I folded the note and slipped it into my jacket pocket. I wasn't entirely sure why I kept it. Perhaps it was just part of the process, part of saying goodbye, not just to her, but to the life we had envisioned together. Now all I could do was leave the house, leave the memories behind, and try to move forward, even if it felt like trudging through quicksand. There would be no perfect ending, no sense of victory or triumph, only a slow, painful journey toward healing, one step at a time. But for the first time, the road ahead didn't seem so frightening. It stretched out before me, vast and filled with possibilities. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could take a deep breath. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but I was sure of one thing: I was ready to face whatever came next. When I went to see our children, I told them that their mother had destroyed our 39-year marriage, which left them stunned. My daughter urged me to stay with her and her family so I could recover and spend more time with my grandchildren. After 3 months, the sharp sting of betrayal began to fade. But then something terrible happened. Patricia suffered a stroke. She was in critical condition and needed care, but I felt nothing. That was her punishment. And that, my friend, is the end of this story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the Force be with you.